In a small college town in Ohio, a hardworking mother was about to face the most devastating rejection of her life. What started as a proud phone call about graduation plans took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her son's shame. Linda Johnson wasn't your typical janitor. For 15 years, she had spent her life making sacrifices for her son's education, known for her quiet dignity and unwavering love. When she encountered Michael's request to skip his graduation ceremony, she had no idea she was walking into a betrayal that would challenge everything about worth and family. What began as unconditional love would become a lesson in true dignity. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first light of dawn hadn't yet touched the Gothic spires of Whitmore University when Linda Johnson's key card clicked against the service entrance of Thornfield Hall. The sound echoed through the empty corridor like a prayer, quiet, reverent, full of purpose. She'd been making the same entrance for 15 years, but today felt different. Today, the acceptance letter from Eastwick College lay folded in her uniform pocket, its weight somehow greater than the industrial vacuum she pulled behind her. Linda moved through the hallways with practiced efficiency, her steps soft against polished marble floors that cost more per square foot than she made in a month. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent her nights maintaining spaces where tomorrow's leaders learned about economics and sociology, where young minds debated theories about poverty and social mobility, while she remained invisible in their peripheral vision. Her phone buzzed against her hip. A text from Michael. "Mom, got the financial aid estimate. Call when you can. Love you." She paused beside a tall window overlooking the quad, where bronze statues of university founders cast long shadows across manicured lawns. The financial aid estimate. She'd been dreading those numbers, even as she'd celebrated Michael's acceptance to one of the most prestigious colleges in the country. "Morning, Linda." Professor Patricia Hayes emerged from her office, coffee mug in hand, looking surprised to see anyone else awake at this hour. "Morning, Professor Hayes." Linda straightened, though she never slouched. Dignity, her mother had taught her, cost nothing and was worth everything. "You're here early today." "Grant deadline." Professor Hayes smiled, the kind of warm smile that had made Linda comfortable talking to her over the years. "You know how it is. Deadlines don't care about normal hours." "No, they don't." Linda thought of her own deadline. Tuition payment due in 3 months. "I'll work around your office." "Actually, Linda," Professor Hayes hesitated, "I heard through the faculty grapevine that your son got into Eastwick. That's incredible. You must be so proud." The pride swelled in Linda's chest, immediate and overwhelming. "I am. He worked so hard for it. You both did." Professor Hayes's words carried weight, acknowledgement. "I've watched you here for years. The dedication you've shown to his education. It's remarkable." Linda's throat tightened. Recognition was rare in her world, especially from someone like Professor Hayes, someone whose opinion mattered in the academic circles Michael would soon enter. After Professor Hayes returned to her office, Linda pulled out her phone and called Michael. He answered on the first ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mom? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, honey. You texted about the financial aid?" She heard rustling, papers shuffling. "Yeah, hold on. Okay, so the good news is I got some need-based aid. About 12,000. Linda did the math quickly. 35,000 minus 12,000. $23,000. Her heart sank even as she kept her voice steady. "That's wonderful about the aid. But Mom, that still leaves..." Michael's voice trailed off. He knew the numbers, as well as she did. 23,000, Linda finished. "It's okay, Michael. We'll figure it out." "Mom, that's more than you make in a year. Maybe I should look at state schools or..." "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. "Michael, you earned this. Eastwick is your dream school. You've wanted this since you were 14. She remembered that day clearly. Michael, barely in high school, showing her an article about Eastwick's business program, his eyes bright with possibility. "Mom, look at this. They have a 95% job placement rate. Students there go on to work at Google, Goldman Sachs. They change the world." "But Mom, the money is my concern, not yours." Linda leaned against the window, watching the sun finally crest the university's bell tower. You focus on finishing strong this semester. Let me worry about the finances. After she hung up, Linda walked to the supply closet and sat on an overturned bucket, allowing herself one moment of overwhelming fear. $23,000. Even with her salary from the university and her weekend cleaning jobs, it seemed impossible. She pulled the acceptance letter from her pocket and unfolded it carefully. Congratulations, Michael Johnson. You have been accepted to Eastwick College's class of 2025. The letterhead was elegant, embossed, speaking of tradition and prestige. Her phone rang again. Linda? It's Susie. Susan Williams had been her closest friend since starting at the university. 6 years ago, they worked different buildings but shared the same early morning shift, the same struggles, the same dreams for their children. Hey, Susie. Girl, I can hear it in your voice. What's wrong? Linda found herself smiling despite everything. Susie could read her better than anyone. Michael got into Eastwick. That's amazing. So why do you sound like somebody died? 23,000. That's what we still owe after financial aid. Silence stretched between them. Susie knew what 23,000 meant to people like them. Linda, honey, there's got to be a way. What about more loans? Linda had already been to the financial aid office twice that week. I can get some additional loans, but not enough, and with my credit. She didn't finish the sentence. Single mothers with limited income didn't have pristine credit scores. That evening, in her small apartment 3 blocks from campus, Linda spread papers across her kitchen table. Bank statements, loan applications, Michael's acceptance letters from 4 different schools. Eastwick's letter sat in the center, surrounded by calculations written on napkins and envelope backs. She opened her laptop, a refurbished model Michael had found for her 2 years ago, and began researching every possible scholarship, grant, and aid program. Her eyes burned as she read through eligibility requirements, most of which she didn't meet. From her bedroom dresser, she retrieved a small jewelry box her mother had given her. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay her mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. Her mother had worn it for 47 years, through factory work and raising 5 children, through Linda's teenage pregnancy and subsequent struggles. For emergencies, her mother had said, when she pressed it into Linda's hand during her final hospital stay. Real emergencies. Linda held the ring up to the lamplight, watching it catch and scatter the yellow glow. Was this an emergency, or was she being foolish, romantic about a dream that was too expensive for people like them? She thought about Michael's face when he talked about Eastwick, the way his whole body seemed to vibrate with possibility. She thought about the life she'd never had, the education that had slipped away when she'd gotten pregnant at 17, the dreams deferred and eventually forgotten. But Michael's dreams didn't have to be deferred. Not if she had anything to say about it. Linda picked up her phone and called the local pawn shop. Hi, I have a ring I'd like to get appraised. After she hung up, she sat in the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the evidence of their modest life. Furniture from thrift stores, appliances that worked but wheezed, photos of Michael's academic achievements covering every available surface. Tomorrow she would start making the calls. Weekend cleaning jobs at businesses downtown, maybe night work at the hospital. She would find a way to bridge that $23,000 gap, even if it meant working every available hour, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort, her own health. Michael would go to Eastwick College. He would have the opportunities she'd never had. And someday, when he was successful and secure, maybe he'd understand the depth of what she'd given up for his dreams. Her phone buzzed with another text from Michael. Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we should be realistic about this. I don't want you to struggle more than you already do. Linda typed back quickly. Don't worry about money. Your job is to be a student. I've got this handled. She pressed send before she could second-guess herself, then looked around her small apartment, her kingdom, built on sacrifice and sustained by love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more calculations, more late nights planning and working. But tonight, she allowed herself to dream alongside her son. Eastwick College. The foundation of everything they'd worked toward together. Marcus's hand swept dismissively across the leather interior of his father's BMW as Michael climbed into the passenger's seat at the airport pickup area. Sorry about the tight space, man. Dad's got the Range Rover today, and Mom took the Tesla to her book club thing. Michael nodded, trying to process having 3 cars as a casual family situation, while his own mother had driven him to the airport in their 12-year-old Honda, its air conditioning wheezing and dashboard held together with electrical tape. The contrast hit him like cold water. Marcus casually mentioning luxury vehicles the way Michael might mention which pair of jeans he'd grabbed from his closet. So this is your first time seeing Eastwick? Marcus navigated through campus traffic, with practiced ease, pointing out buildings like a tour guide. That's the new Science Center. $60 million renovation last year. And that monstrosity over there is where the business majors pretend to understand economics. Michael watched students walking across perfectly manicured quads, many carrying designer backpacks that probably cost more than Linda made in a week. Everyone seemed to belong here in a way that made Michael acutely aware of his own discount luggage and carefully budgeted wardrobe. Your mom seems cool, Marcus said, glancing in the rearview mirror as if Linda might still be visible at the airport curb. Very authentic. The word hung between them, and Michael wasn't sure if it was a compliment or polite code for something else. Yeah, she's great. What's she do again? Michael's throat tightened. He'd rehearsed this moment, but facing it felt different than practicing in his bedroom mirror. She works at a university. Administrative stuff. It wasn't technically a lie, he told himself. Linda did work at a university, and keeping buildings clean and functional was arguably administrative. But the words tasted wrong in his mouth, heavy with deception. Their dormitory was a Gothic revival masterpiece that looked more like a luxury hotel than student housing. Michael's room was larger than his and Linda's living room at home, with tall windows overlooking the quad and furniture that looked like it belonged in a catalog. Not bad for freshman digs, Marcus said, dropping his Louis Vuitton duffel bag on his bed. Though I heard the sophomores get the really nice suites. My brother graduated from here 3 years ago. He had a place junior year that was basically a penthouse. Michael unpacked methodically, hyper-aware that his belongings looked sparse compared to Marcus's collection of expensive electronics, designer clothes, and casual accessories that spoke of wealth so ingrained it didn't need to announce itself. Dining hall opens in an hour, Marcus said, checking his phone. Fair warning. The food's actually decent here, not like the horror stories you hear about most college cafeterias. Probably because they charge enough tuition to hire actual chefs. The dining hall buzzed with nervous energy and excited voices. Michael followed Marcus through the serving line, trying not to stare at the abundance. Multiple entree options, a salad bar that looked like a gourmet restaurant display, desserts that belonged in a bakery window. They joined a table of other freshmen, and Michael found himself listening to conversations that felt like glimpses into an alternate universe. Spring break in the Bahamas. Summer internships at family friends companies. Casual mentions of prep, schools he'd only heard about in movies. So where's everyone from? Asked a girl named Catherine, her accent suggesting East Coast privilege. The answers came easily from around the table. Greenwich. Palo Alto. My family splits time between Boston and Martha's Vineyard. Just outside Philadelphia. Haverford, if you know it. When attention turned to Michael, he felt every eye at the table waiting. Ohio, he said simply. Oh cool, which part? Catherine's smile was genuine, interested. Small town near Columbus, you probably haven't heard of it. The conversation moved on, but Michael noticed how geography seemed to carry weight here, how certain place names earned knowing nods, while others generated polite but disinterested responses. Later, back in their room, Michael called Linda while Marcus was in the shower. How's everything, honey? Linda's voice carried through the phone, warm and familiar, a lifeline to home. Good, really good. He looked around the room that cost more per semester than their apartment's annual rent. The campus is incredible, Mom. You should see the library. It's like something from Harry Potter. I can't wait to visit and see it all. Linda's excitement traveled through the phone. Are you eating enough? Making friends? Yeah. My roommate's nice. Marcus. He's from Connecticut. That sounds wonderful. I'm so proud of you, Michael. This is everything we dreamed about. After they hung up, Michael lay on his narrow dorm bed staring at the ceiling. Outside, his window, he could hear voices on the quad. Students whose biggest worry seemed to be choosing between their parents' multiple vacation homes for Thanksgiving break. Marcus emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist, completely comfortable, in his own skin. Everything cool at home? Yeah, just checking in with my mom. That's sweet. My parents barely remember to text unless they need something. Marcus pulled on expensive-looking pajamas. Though I guess when you're paying this much for college, they figure their parental duties are covered. He said it as a joke, but Michael heard the casual assumption underneath, that paying for college was just what parents did, like buying groceries or covering car insurance, not the monumental sacrifice that required selling wedding rings and working 3 jobs. Michael turned toward the wall, pulling his comforter up to his chin. Tomorrow would bring more conversations like tonight's, more moments where he'd have to choose between honesty and belonging, more opportunities to edit his history, to present a version of himself that fit better in these marble hallways and oak-paneled common rooms. The acceptance letter that had represented pure joy just months ago now felt like the beginning of something more complicated. Success, yes, but at what cost? And to whom? 3 months into his first semester, Michael had perfected the art of strategic omission. When classmates asked about his background during study groups in the library's mahogany-paneled rooms, he'd learned to redirect conversations with questions about their own experiences. When weekend plans involved expensive restaurants or concerts, he'd cite academic commitments rather than admit financial constraints. "Your mom sounds mysterious," Jennifer Chen said one afternoon, as they walked between classes. They'd been paired for a sociology project, and her genuine curiosity about his family made Michael increasingly uncomfortable. "Every time I ask about her, you get this look like you're solving calculus in your head." Michael forced a laugh. "Not mysterious. Just boring university administration stuff. You know how it is. Nobody wants to hear about budget meetings and paperwork." Jennifer's expression suggested she didn't entirely buy his explanation, but she let it slide. Her own background was complicated in different ways. Wealthy parents who'd raised her with strong social justice values, creating someone who moved easily between privilege and principle. Meanwhile, 400 miles away, Linda's body was sending increasingly urgent signals that she couldn't ignore. The pain in her lower back had progressed from occasional twinges to constant ache, made worse by the extra weekend cleaning jobs she'd taken on to cover Michael's expenses. She'd started each day with ibuprofen and ended it with ice packs, telling herself the discomfort was temporary. "You're walking like my grandmother," Susie observed during their Thursday morning shift in the administration building, "and she's been dead 10 years. Linda straightened her shoulders, though the movement sent sharp pain down her spine. "I'm fine. Just pulled something moving furniture last weekend." "Linda, honey, you've been pulling something for 2 months. Now. When's the last time you saw a doctor?" The question hung between them as they worked. Healthcare was another luxury Linda had learned to ration, another expense that competed with Michael's education fund. Her insurance through the university covered basics, but co-pays and deductibles added up quickly. "I don't have time to be sick," Linda said finally. Their weekly phone calls had become exercises in careful choreography, Michael avoiding details that might reveal his struggles with belonging, Linda hiding the increasing toll of her multiple jobs. Both were protecting the other from truths that might complicate their shared dream. "How are classes going?" Linda asked during their Sunday evening call, settling into her kitchen chair with a heating pad pressed against her back. "Great. Really challenging, but great." Michael paced his dorm room, Marcus out at some social event Michael had declined to attend. "My sociology professor thinks I should consider graduate school eventually." Pride bloomed in Linda's chest, warm and sustaining. "That's wonderful, honey. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. How's work? You sound tired." Linda glanced at the stack of bills on her table, the loan payment notices, the careful calculations that filled notebook margins. "Just busy. You know how it is at the end of the semester. Lots of extra events and cleanup." What she didn't mention was the 3rd job she'd taken on, cleaning offices downtown 3 nights a week after finishing her university shifts. Or that she'd started rationing meals, skipping lunch to save money for his textbooks next semester. Michael, for his part, didn't mention the growing anxiety that accompanied every social interaction, the constant mental editing required to present an acceptable version of himself. He'd become skilled at deflecting personal questions, at laughing, along with jokes about the help, without revealing how each casual dismissal of working-class people felt like a personal attack. "My roommate's family owns half of Manhattan," he'd overheard Marcus telling someone in the hallway. "Well, not literally, but you know what I mean. Old money. The kind of people who've never worried about anything as vulgar as employment." The conversation had continued with other students sharing similar stories about their family's wealth and influence, creating an atmosphere where Michael's background felt not just different, but potentially embarrassing. How could he explain Linda's dignity, her strength, her sacrifice, to people who viewed manual labor as something that happened in the background of their privileged lives? During Thanksgiving break, the careful distance became more apparent. Michael spent only 3 days at home, claiming he needed to return early for study groups. Linda prepared his favorite meals and tried to create the warm homecoming she'd imagined, but something had shifted between them. "You seem different," she said on his last evening home, watching him scroll through his phone during dinner. "Different? How?" "More serious. Less present." Michael looked up from his phone, seeing his mother clearly for the first time in months. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, though she was trying to hide it. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved carefully, as if guarding against pain. "Are you okay, Mom? You look tired." "I'm fine, just working a lot." Linda forced a smile. "I want to hear more about your classes, your friends. Tell me about this Jennifer you mentioned." But even as they talked, Michael found himself editing his stories, removing details that might connect his college world to their kitchen table reality. The gap between his two lives had become a chasm he wasn't sure how to bridge, or if he even wanted to. The sociology classroom buzzed with post-lecture energy as students packed their notebooks and debated Professor Hayes's points about educational inequality. Michael had written 3 pages of notes, his pen moving frantically to capture every insight about social mobility and class barriers, topics that felt simultaneously academic and painfully personal. "That was intense," Jennifer said, sliding her laptop into her bag. "The part about first-generation college students caught my attention. The statistics about family stress and identity conflicts." Michael's hand froze on his backpack zipper. "Yeah, heavy stuff. Want to grab coffee? I'm curious about your take on it." Jennifer's eyes held genuine interest, the kind of intellectual engagement that had first drawn Michael to her during their project partnership. At the campus coffee shop, a space that managed to feel both sophisticated and welcoming, Jennifer ordered a specialty latte, while Michael chose regular coffee, black. The price difference was small, but Michael had learned to notice these details, to make choices that stretched his carefully budgeted meal plan. "So, what did you think about Professor Hayes's point about hidden costs?" Jennifer asked, settling into a worn leather chair. "The idea that succeeding in higher education sometimes requires students to distance themselves from their families." Michael's throat constricted. "I think it's probably more complicated than that." "How so?" He found himself trapped between honesty and self-preservation. "Maybe it's not about distancing yourself from family, but about expanding your world, growing beyond what you knew before." Jennifer tilted her head, studying him with the intensity she brought to their sociology discussions. "That sounds like rationalization, like justifying abandonment by calling it growth." The word abandonment hit Michael like a physical blow. He thought of Linda's excited voice during their last phone call, her questions about his classes, her pride in his achievements. Was that what he was doing? Abandoning her? "I don't think it's that simple," he said carefully. "My parents always emphasized that success means bringing others with you, not leaving them behind." Jennifer's voice carried conviction. "They grew up poor in Taiwan, worked their way up in tech, but they never forgot where they came from." "That's easy to say when your parents succeeded too." The words came out sharper than Michael intended. Jennifer's expression shifted, became more curious. "What do you mean?" Michael realized he'd revealed more than he'd planned. "I just mean, sometimes families have different definitions of success. Sometimes what looks like abandonment from the outside is actually protection." "Protection from what?" Before Michael could answer, Marcus appeared at their table, his arrival bringing the scent of expensive cologne and the energy of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. "Michael, and you must be the famous Jennifer I keep hearing about." Marcus extended his hand with practiced charm. "Marcus Thompson. Michael's been hiding you from his roommate." Jennifer smiled politely, but didn't seem particularly impressed by Marcus's confidence. "Nice to meet you." "We were just discussing Professor Hayes's lecture," Michael said, grateful for the interruption and annoyed by his own relief. "Oh, sociology. The bleeding heart liberal arts stuff." Marcus grinned as if he'd made a joke. "My dad always says sociology is just an excuse for people to complain about their circumstances instead of changing them." Jennifer's expression cooled noticeably. "Your father sounds charming." The sarcasm was gentle, but unmistakable. Marcus, apparently immune to subtle social cues, continued talking about his family's various business ventures, while Jennifer and Michael exchanged glances. Later, after Marcus had left to meet other friends, Jennifer turned to Michael with renewed curiosity. "Your roommate's interesting," she said diplomatically. "He's not that bad, just privileged." "And you're not?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Michael felt the familiar weight of deception, the careful balancing act he'd perfected over the past months. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I guess we all have different kinds of privilege," he said finally. Jennifer's phone buzzed with a text, and she glanced at it with a slight frown. "My mom. She wants to know when she can meet my study partner." She looked up at Michael with a mixture of amusement and something else. Expectation, maybe. "She's been asking about you for weeks." Michael's stomach clenched. "Meet me?" "Spring break's coming up," I was thinking. "Maybe you could come home with me for a weekend? My parents love meeting my friends, and Mom's been dying to cook for someone who appreciates good food." The invitation was warm, genuine, and terrifying. Michael imagined sitting at Jennifer's family table, fielding questions about his own family, his background, his mother's work. The thought of explaining Linda's reality to people who'd built their success story felt impossible. "That sounds great," he heard himself saying. "But I should probably spend spring break with my mom. I haven't seen her much this semester." "Of course. Maybe she could come too." "I'd love to meet her." Michael's heart pounded. She's really busy with work. Hard to get away." Jennifer nodded, but her expression suggested she was filing away another piece of information about Michael's mysterious family situation. That night, Michael lay in his dorm bed listening to Marcus talk about his own spring break plans. A week in Aspen with his family, followed by a trip to his grandmother's house in the Hamptons. The casual mention of multiple vacation homes felt like a different language entirely. When Marcus finally fell asleep, Michael pulled out his phone and stared at Linda's contact information. He could call her, tell her about Jennifer, about the invitation, about the growing complexity of maintaining his dual existence. But what would be the point? Linda had enough to worry about without adding his social anxieties to her burden. Instead, he lay in the darkness, thinking about Professor Hayes's lecture on identity conflicts and family stress. The statistics had been sobering. First-generation college students were significantly more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and relationship difficulties. They were caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Michael closed his eyes and tried to imagine a version of himself that could bring Jennifer home to meet Linda, that could introduce his girlfriend to his mother without shame or fear. But the image wouldn't come into focus. The distance between his two worlds felt too vast, the risk of exposure too great. Professor Patricia Hayes had always believed that the most important conversations happened in the margins, after class, during office hours, in the quiet spaces between formal academic interactions. It was during these unguarded moments that students revealed their true struggles, their authentic selves emerging from behind carefully constructed facades. Michael Johnson intrigued her. His papers on social stratification were exceptional, demonstrating an intuitive understanding of class dynamics that went beyond textbook knowledge. When he wrote about the psychological costs of social mobility, his analysis carried a weight that suggested personal familiarity with the subject. Yet whenever she tried to engage him about his insights, he deflected with academic theory rather than lived experience. Your essay on educational inequality was particularly strong, Professor Hayes said during their scheduled meeting, gesturing to the paper on her desk marked with an A+. The section about family sacrifice and student guilt was especially nuanced. Have you considered graduate school? Michael shifted in his chair, clearly pleased but uncomfortable with the praise. Thank you. I hadn't really thought about graduate school yet. You should. With writing like this, you could contribute meaningfully to sociological research. Professor Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying his face. Your perspective on class mobility is remarkably sophisticated. It reads like you've observed these dynamics firsthand. The comment hung in the air between them. Michael's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, a reaction Professor Hayes recognized from her own college years when professors probed too close to truths she wasn't ready to share. I guess I've just thought about these issues a lot, Michael said carefully. Professor Hayes nodded, remembering her own strategic evasions decades earlier. She'd been 22 once, sitting in a similar chair, desperate to belong in academic spaces while hiding her factory worker parents from classmates who casually discussed their family's professional achievements. I grew up in Detroit, she said quietly, seemingly changing the subject. My parents worked at the Ford plant, 40 years between them, until the layoffs in the 80s. Michael's attention sharpened, though he tried to hide his interest. I was the first in my family to attend college, Wayne State, then graduate school at Michigan. Professor Hayes smiled at the memory. I spent my entire undergraduate career terrified that someone would discover I didn't belong, that they'd realize I was just a factory worker's daughter pretending to understand intellectual discourse. How did you get through it? Michael asked, his careful composure slipping slightly. Slowly, and with help from people who recognized that my background was a strength, not a weakness. Professor Hayes pulled out a photo from her desk drawer, a faded picture of her parents at her doctoral graduation, her father in an ill-fitting suit, her mother beaming with pride. It took me years to understand that my perspective was valuable precisely because it was different. Michael stared at the photo, something shifting in his expression. The guilt was the hardest part, Professor Hayes continued, feeling like I was betraying my family by succeeding in ways they couldn't understand, like I was rejecting everything they'd taught me about work and value and dignity. The words seemed to hit Michael like physical blows. His hands clenched in his lap, and Professor Hayes could see him fighting some internal battle. But here's what I learned, she said gently. Education isn't about leaving your family behind. It's about expanding your ability to honor their sacrifices. The best social research comes from people who understand multiple worlds, who can build bridges between different kinds of knowledge. After Michael left, Professor Hayes sat in her office thinking about their conversation. Something about his reactions, his careful word choices, nagged at her. The intensity of his interest in her background story suggested more than academic curiosity. That evening, as she often did when working late, Professor Hayes stopped by the main library to return books. The building would be nearly empty except for security and the late-night cleaning crew. She'd developed friendly relationships with several of the custodial staff over the years, appreciating their quiet dedication to maintaining the spaces where learning happened. Evening, Professor Hayes, Linda Johnson called softly from behind the circulation desk, where she was wiping down surfaces with careful attention to detail. Linda, hello. Working late again? Always. Linda's smile was tired but genuine. How are your classes going? Professor Hayes paused, struck by something in Linda's voice, a quality she couldn't quite identify. Good. Challenging students this semester. I have one young man who writes about social issues with remarkable insight. That's wonderful. Students who really engage with the material must make the work rewarding. He does. Professor Hayes found herself studying Linda's face. He writes about family sacrifice and social mobility with unusual depth. Makes me think he's observed these dynamics personally. Linda's hands stilled on the desk surface. Sounds like a thoughtful young man. Michael Johnson, Professor Hayes said, watching Linda's reaction carefully. The cleaning rag dropped from Linda's hands. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, pride, concern, and something that looked like fear. Michael, Michael Johnson? Linda's voice was barely above a whisper. Linda? Professor Hayes stepped closer. Do you know him? Linda's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. He's my son. The revelation hit Professor Hayes like a puzzle piece clicking into place. Michael's sophisticated understanding of class dynamics, his careful evasions about his family background, his visceral reaction to discussions about family sacrifice and student guilt. Your son, Professor Hayes repeated, her mind reframing every interaction she'd had with Michael through this new lens. He doesn't know that you and I… Linda struggled to find words. He's never mentioned that his mother works here? Linda's silence answered the question. Professor Hayes felt a familiar ache, the recognition of a young person caught between worlds, ashamed of the very sacrifices that had made his success possible. Linda, he's brilliant. His insights into social inequality are extraordinary. He always was smart. Linda's voice carried fierce pride mixed with pain. Even as a little boy, asking questions about everything, wanting to understand how the world worked. He's studying exactly that now, and he's exceptional at it. Linda picked up her cleaning supplies, suddenly seeming fragile in a way Professor Hayes had never noticed before. I should get back to work. Linda, wait. Professor Hayes touched her arm gently. He writes about family sacrifice with such depth because he understands it personally, because of what you've given him. He's embarrassed by me. The words came out quietly, matter-of-factly, as if Linda had accepted this as inevitable. He's struggling with identity, with belonging. I've seen it before. First-generation students caught between their family's world and their academic world. It's not about embarrassment. It's about fear. Linda looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Fear of what? Fear of not being worthy, of the sacrifice. Fear of disappointing you. Fear of not belonging in either world fully. Professor Hayes paused, fear that acknowledging where he comes from might somehow diminish what he's achieved. That night, Professor Hayes sat in her office long after Linda had finished her cleaning rounds, thinking about the young man who wrote so eloquently about family sacrifice while hiding his own mother's existence from his academic world. She thought about the woman who cleaned these halls with quiet dignity, supporting her son's dreams while he struggled with the very background that had shaped his remarkable insights. Tomorrow, she would have to decide how to use this knowledge. How to help a brilliant student understand that his greatest strength lay not in hiding his origins, but in honoring them. Spring semester brought with it an intensity that seemed to permeate every aspect of campus life. Senior year was drawing to a close, and with it came the mounting pressure of graduation. Job interviews, graduate school applications, and the inevitable question that haunted Michael's sleepless nights. What would happen when his two carefully separated worlds collided during the ceremony that was meant to celebrate everything he'd achieved? The anxiety manifested in small ways at first. Michael found himself avoiding conversations about family weekend plans, deflecting Marcus's casual invitations to meet his parents when they visited campus. He'd developed an almost supernatural ability to change subjects whenever graduation guest lists came up in casual conversation. My parents are already planning their outfits, Jennifer mentioned one afternoon, as they studied in the library's quiet section. Mom's been shopping for what she calls academic formal wear for 3 weeks. She's so excited she can barely contain herself. Michael's pen stopped moving across his notebook page. That's nice. What about your mom? Is she planning to come up early to see the campus before graduation? The question hung in the air like smoke. Michael felt his throat constrict, that familiar tightness that had become his body's automatic response to any mention of Linda attending graduation. I'm not sure yet, he managed. She's really busy with work. Jennifer looked up from her textbook, studying his face with the same analytical attention she brought to their sociology assignments. Michael, you realize graduation is in 2 months, right? Most families book hotels and make travel arrangements way in advance. Right, of course. Michael turned back to his notes, hoping his downcast eyes would signal the end of the conversation. But Jennifer wasn't easily deterred. I'd love to meet her. After all this time, it feels weird that I've never even talked to her on the phone. Michael's hand gripped his pen so tightly his knuckles went white. She's pretty private, not big on meeting new people. The lie tasted bitter in his mouth. Linda would love Jennifer, would probably spend hours asking about her, studies, her family, her plans after graduation. Linda had always been genuinely interested in people, especially young people working toward their goals. But the thought of those worlds intersecting filled Michael with a panic he couldn't name or control. Meanwhile, 400 miles away, Linda was experiencing her own version of anticipatory joy. She'd been planning for Michael's graduation since the day he'd started college, setting aside small amounts of money for travel expenses, gradually accumulating enough for a hotel room and a new dress. The first new dress she'd bought in nearly 5 years. The dress hung in her tiny bedroom closet, still in its department store bag. Navy blue with a modest neckline, appropriate for a proud mother attending her son's college graduation. She'd tried it on 3 times since purchasing it, each time imagining herself in the audience, watching Michael walk across the stage to receive his diploma. "You're glowing," Susie observed during their Wednesday morning shift. "Like you won the lottery or something." "Graduation's in 8 weeks, Linda said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. "I can't believe it's almost here." "Have you booked your hotel yet? Those places near Eastwick probably fill up fast for graduation weekend." Linda smiled. "Already done. Made the reservation last month." She'd splurged on a room at a modest hotel just 15 minutes from campus, reasoning that this was a once-in-a-lifetime occasion worth the extra expense. "And Michael's excited about showing you around campus?" Linda paused in her cleaning, suddenly realizing they hadn't actually discussed the specifics of graduation weekend. "We haven't talked about the details yet. He's so busy with final projects and job interviews." That evening, Linda called Michael with her graduation plans, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm that had been building for months. "Hi, honey. I hope I'm not interrupting studying." "No, it's fine, Mom. What's up?" "I wanted to talk about graduation. I've got everything arranged. My hotel reservation, time off work. I even bought a new dress." Linda laughed, feeling almost giddy. "I know it's silly, but I wanted to look nice for your big day." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough for Linda's excitement to begin curdling into concern. "Michael, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here." His voice sounded strained, distant. "Mom, listen." Something in his tone made Linda's stomach clench. She sat down heavily in her kitchen chair, suddenly needing the support. "What is it, honey?" "Graduation is. It's really complicated. There are limited tickets, and the ceremony is huge, and it's not really a family kind of thing." Linda felt the words hit her like cold water. "What do you mean?" "I mean, most students don't really have family there. It's more of an academic ceremony, very formal. Lots of professors and university officials." Each word felt like a small betrayal, but Linda couldn't understand why. Michael would say something so obviously untrue. "Honey, graduation ceremonies are for families. That's the whole point." "Mom, you don't understand. This isn't like high school graduation. Eastwick is different. It's—" Michael's voice trailed off, and in the silence, Linda began to understand something that made her chest ache with a pain she couldn't name. "It's what, Michael?" "It's just different from what you're used to." The phrase hung between them, loaded with implications that Linda was only beginning to grasp. Different from what she was used to. Different from her world. Different from people like her. "I see." Linda's voice had gone very quiet. "Mom, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings. I just think you might feel out of place." Out of place. At her own son's graduation. The son she'd worked 3 jobs to support. The son whose tuition she'd paid by selling her mother's wedding ring and taking on debt that would take years to repay. "Michael," Linda said carefully, "are you asking me not to come to your graduation?" The pause that followed lasted forever, and no time at all. "I just think maybe it would be better for both of us." Linda's throat closed completely. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the magnitude of what her son was telling her. "Mom, are you there?" "I'm here." The words came out as a whisper. I know this is hard to understand, but I'm thinking about both of us. You'd be more comfortable at home, and I wouldn't have to worry about you feeling overwhelmed by everything. Comfortable at home. While her son received the diploma she'd sacrificed everything to make possible. I understand, Linda said, though. She understood nothing except that the child she'd loved and supported and believed in had just told her she wasn't good enough to witness his greatest achievement. Mom, please don't be upset. We can celebrate afterward, just the two of us. It'll be better that way. Of course. Linda's voice sounded strange to her own ears. Too calm, too controlled. Whatever you think is best. After she hung up, Linda sat in her kitchen for a long time, staring at the bills and financial documents that still covered her table. The graduation hotel reservation confirmation sat among them, now looking absurd and naive. She walked to her bedroom and looked at the navy blue dress hanging in her closet, still in its bag, waiting for an occasion that would never come. The woman who'd bought that dress, full of pride and anticipation, felt like a stranger now. Linda Johnson had always known her place in the world. She'd never expected special treatment or recognition beyond what her honest work earned. But she'd never imagined that the child she'd devoted her life to supporting would consider her presence at his graduation an embarrassment to be avoided. The foundation of everything she'd believed about their relationship had just cracked, and Linda wasn't sure how to begin repairing the damage, or if repair was even possible. The 3 days following Michael's phone call passed in a haze of mechanical routine for Linda. She went through the motions of her daily life, waking before dawn, completing her cleaning rounds at the university, returning home to an apartment that felt smaller and emptier than ever before. But underneath the surface normalcy, something fundamental had shifted, like a bone that had been broken and wasn't healing properly. She found herself standing in front of her bedroom closet repeatedly, staring at the navy blue dress that hung there like an accusation. Each time, she told herself she should return it, get her money back, accept the reality of Michael's decision. But each time, she closed the closet door without touching the garment, unable to take that final step toward accepting that she wouldn't be watching her son graduate. On Thursday morning, while cleaning the sociology building, Linda encountered Professor Hayes in the hallway. The older woman's warm greeting felt like salt in an open wound. "Linda, how are you? You look tired." "I'm fine," Linda replied automatically, though she knew her appearance suggested otherwise. She'd caught glimpses of herself in mirrors over the past few days, hollow-eyed, diminished somehow, as if Michael's rejection had physically reduced her. Professor Hayes studied her with the kind of careful attention that made Linda want to hide. "Is everything all right with Michael?" "I know. Graduation is coming up. You must be so excited." The words hit Linda like a physical blow. She felt her carefully constructed composure begin to crumble, and before she could stop herself, tears were spilling down her cheeks. "Linda?" Professor Hayes stepped closer, her voice filled with concern. "What's happened?" "He doesn't want me there." The words came out in a broken whisper. "At graduation, he thinks I'll be out of place." Professor Hayes's expression shifted through surprise, understanding, and then anger. "He said that?" Linda nodded, unable to trust her voice. She leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted by the weight of carrying this secret shame. That brilliant, insightful young man who writes so eloquently about family sacrifice told his mother not to attend his graduation? Professor Hayes's voice carried a steel edge that Linda had never heard before. "He's not wrong," Linda said quietly. "I would be out of place. All those families, professors, important people, and me. Linda Johnson." Professor Hayes's voice was sharp enough to make Linda look up. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare diminish yourself because your son is struggling with his own insecurities." But the damage was already done. Michael's words had awakened every doubt Linda had ever harbored about her worth, every moment of insecurity she'd felt, moving through spaces where her presence was invisible, unremarkable, easily dismissed. That evening, Linda sat at her kitchen table with the hotel reservation printout in her hands. The confirmation number seemed to mock her, a string of digits representing hope and pride that had been rendered meaningless by a 10-minute phone conversation. Her phone rang. Susie's name appeared on the screen. "Girl, you sound terrible," Susie said without preamble when Linda answered. "What's going on?" Linda found herself telling Susie everything. Michael's call, his reasoning, the dress hanging in her closet, the hotel reservation she couldn't bring herself to cancel. The silence that followed was different from the awkward pauses that had punctuated her conversation with Michael. This was the silence of someone processing something unthinkable. "That boy did not just tell you not to come to his graduation?" Susie said finally, her voice dangerously quiet. "He's not wrong, Susie. I would feel out of place." "Stop!" Susie's voice cut through Linda's self-deprecation like a blade. "Just stop. You worked 3 jobs to pay for that boy's education. You sold your mama's wedding ring. You've been eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so he could eat in fancy dining halls. That was my choice. And attending his graduation should be your reward, your moment to see what your sacrifice accomplished." Susie's voice was building towards something Linda recognized as righteous fury. "That child has lost his mind if he thinks he can keep you away from celebrating the achievement you made possible." Linda felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but shifting, like ice beginning to thaw. "He's ashamed of me." The words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that felt too heavy for Linda's small kitchen to contain. "Then, he's forgotten who he is," Susie said simply, "and somebody needs to remind him." After they hung up, Linda walked to her bedroom and opened the closet door. The navy blue dress hung there, still wrapped in its protective plastic, still waiting. She touched the fabric through the bag, remembering the woman who had bought it. A woman full of anticipation and pride. A woman who believed her son's success was something they had achieved together. That woman felt like a stranger now. Meanwhile, Michael paced his dorm room, unable to concentrate on the senior thesis that was due in 2 weeks. Marcus was out at another social event, a pre-graduation party at someone's off-campus house, and the silence felt oppressive rather than peaceful. Michael's conversation with Linda kept replaying in his mind, each repetition making him feel simultaneously guilty and relieved. He'd handled it badly, he knew that. The pain in his mother's voice had been unmistakable. But wasn't this better than the alternative? Better than watching her navigate a world where she didn't belong? Better than fielding questions about his family from classmates who would never understand? His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Study group tomorrow at 2? Also, my parents want to confirm graduation plans. Should they book dinner for 4 or just 3? 4. That would include Michael, which meant Jennifer was still expecting to introduce him to her parents during graduation weekend. Still operating under the assumption that families mixed and mingled during these occasions. Michael typed back, "Can't do study group. Thesis. Crunch time. Not sure about dinner plans yet." Another evasion. Another small deception in the elaborate architecture of lies he'd constructed around his identity. He threw his phone onto his bed and sank into his desk chair, staring at the computer screen where his thesis cursor blinked mockingly. The paper was about social mobility and family dynamics, about the psychological costs of transitioning between social classes. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was writing about the very conflicts he was living, analyzing from an academic distance the choices he was making in real time. His phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen. Michael stared at it for several rings before answering. "Hi, Mom. I wanted to make sure you're eating properly," Linda said, her voice carefully controlled. "Final season, you need to take care of yourself." The mundane concern, delivered in a tone that suggested she was trying very hard to sound normal, made Michael's chest ache. "I'm eating fine." "Good. That's good." A pause. "Michael, about graduation." Michael's stomach clenched. "Mom, we already talked about this." "I know. I just wanted you to know that I understand. You're right. I would feel out of place. I'm proud of you no matter what." The gracious acceptance in her voice was somehow worse than anger would have been. It spoke of a woman who had internalized his rejection, who had accepted his assessment of her worth and found it reasonable. "Mom, I should let you get back to studying. I love you, honey. I love you too." But as Michael hung up the phone, the words felt hollow, inadequate to bridge the distance he had created between them. Love was supposed to be unconditional, accepting, proud. What he felt now was more complicated. A mixture of guilt, shame, and a love so tangled up with embarrassment that he couldn't separate the emotions anymore. Outside his dorm window, the campus was alive with the energy of approaching graduation. Students walked in groups, families visited with cameras and proud smiles. Professors prepared for the ceremony that would mark another successful academic year. Michael was part of all of it, and separate from all of it, caught between the world he'd entered and the world he'd tried to leave behind. And for the first time since making his decision, he wondered if the cost of belonging might be higher than he'd calculated. Jennifer Chen had always prided herself on her ability to read people. Growing up in a household where her parents navigated complex business negotiations and social dynamics had taught her to pay attention to subtle cues. The things people didn't say often revealed more than their actual words, which was why Michael's increasingly evasive behavior over the past month had begun to feel less like academic stress and more like deliberate concealment. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine conversation about graduation weekend logistics. They were sitting in the campus coffee shop, surrounded by the familiar buzz of students cramming for finals, when Jennifer pulled out her phone to coordinate plans. "Okay, so my parents' flight gets in Friday afternoon," she said, scrolling through her messages. "Mom wants to know if your family would like to meet for dinner Friday night, or if you'd prefer to do something more casual. She's flexible, but she's dying to finally meet your mom." Michael's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. The familiar tightness in his chest returned, that physical manifestation of panic that had become his body's automatic response to questions about Linda. "Actually, my mom isn't coming to graduation." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but Jennifer heard the careful control behind them. "What do you mean she's not coming? It's your college graduation." "She's really busy with work. Can't get the time off." Michael avoided Jennifer's eyes, focusing instead on the foam dissolving in his coffee. Jennifer set down her phone and studied Michael's face with the same analytical attention she brought to her social work case studies. Something about his body language, the rigid shoulders, the carefully neutral expression, reminded her of the defensive postures she'd observed in clients who were trying to hide painful truths. "Michael, what's really going on?" "Nothing's going on. My mom just can't make it." "That's bullshit." Jennifer's voice was quiet but firm. "You've been weird about your family for months. Every time I ask about your mom, you change the subject, or give me these vague non-answers. And now you're telling me she's missing your college graduation because of work?" Michael's jaw tightened. Not everyone has parents who can drop everything for academic ceremonies. The comment carried an edge that made Jennifer sit back in her chair. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, some people have jobs that matter. More than showing up to clap at graduation ceremonies." "Jobs that matter more than their child's graduation?" Jennifer's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables. "Michael, listen to yourself. You're talking about your mom like she's some kind of absent parent who doesn't care about your achievements." Michael stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't understand. Your parents run tech companies. They can take time off whenever they want, fly anywhere, afford whatever. Not everyone has that luxury." Jennifer stood too, her social work training kicking in as she recognized the defensive anger of someone in pain. "So tell me, help me understand. What does your mom do that's so demanding she can't attend your graduation?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Michael felt trapped, cornered by Jennifer's genuine concern and his own web of deceptions. He could lie again, create another story to maintain the distance he'd carefully constructed. Or he could tell the truth and watch everything he'd built at Eastwick crumble. "She's a janitor," he said finally, the words coming out harsh and bitter. "She cleans buildings. She empties trash cans and scrubs floors and makes minimum wage, and she's not coming to graduation because I told her not to." Jennifer's expression shifted through surprise, confusion, and then something that looked like horror as the full implication of his words sank in. "You told her not to come?" Michael sank back into his chair, his burst of angry honesty leaving him deflated. "You don't understand what it's like, watching everyone else's families, their successful parents, their stories about family businesses and vacation homes and college funds. My mom works 3 jobs to pay my tuition. She sold her mother's wedding ring to help with expenses. And His voice broke slightly. "I didn't want people to see her and know that I come from nothing." Jennifer sat down across from him, her face pale. "Michael, what have you done?" The question was quiet, but it hit Michael like a physical blow. What had he done? He told the woman who'd sacrificed everything for his education that she wasn't good enough to witness its culmination. He'd rejected the person who loved him most, because her love came wrapped in circumstances that embarrassed him. "I thought I was protecting both of us," he said weakly. Protecting her from what? From being proud of her son? From seeing what her sacrifice accomplished? Jennifer's voice carried a disappointment that was somehow worse than anger. "Michael, my parents came to this country with nothing. They worked in restaurants and factories before they built their business. You think I'm ashamed of that? You think their success is less meaningful because they started from the bottom?" Michael couldn't meet her eyes. "It's different. It's exactly the same. The only difference is I'm proud of my parents' journey instead of ashamed of it." Before Michael could respond, Jennifer was gathering her things. "I need some time to think about this. About us. About who you really are underneath all the pretense." She left Michael sitting alone in the coffee shop, surrounded by the wreckage of his carefully constructed identity. Other students continued their conversations around him, oblivious to the fact that his world had just imploded. That evening, Professor Hayes was working late in her office when her phone rang. Linda's name appeared on the screen, which was unusual. They'd exchanged numbers after several late-night conversations, but Linda rarely called. "Linda? Is everything all right?" "Professor Hayes, I'm sorry to bother you." Linda's voice sounded strained, exhausted. "I was wondering. Michael mentioned that you two talk sometimes about his work. Has he said anything about graduation? About his family?" Professor Hayes felt her heart sink. After her conversation with Linda about Michael's request, she'd been hoping the situation would resolve itself, that Michael would come to his senses and recognize what he was doing to his mother. "Linda, what's happened?" "He called tonight, to make sure I understood that I shouldn't come. He wanted to be clear that it wasn't personal, that he just thought I'd be more comfortable at home." Linda's voice carried a hollow quality that made Professor Hayes's chest ache. "I think he was trying to be kind. Kindness doesn't involve telling your mother she's not worthy of celebrating your achievements." "Maybe he's right, though. Maybe I would be out of place." "Linda Johnson, don't you dare." Professor Hayes's voice carried the authority she used in lecture halls when students needed to pay attention. "I've seen you work for 15 years. I've watched you take pride in maintaining this university, creating spaces where learning can happen. You belong at your son's graduation more than anyone else in that auditorium." Linda was quiet for a long moment. "He's ashamed of me. He's struggling with his identity. There's a difference." "Is there?" Professor Hayes thought about her own journey, her own moments of wanting to hide her background from academic colleagues who might judge her differently if they knew her parents worked in factories rather than universities. Yes, there is. Shame suggests permanent judgment. Identity struggle suggests temporary confusion that can be resolved with growth and perspective. How do I help him if he doesn't want my help? Professor Hayes made a decision that went against every instinct about professional boundaries and appropriate involvement in students' personal lives. "Linda, what if I told you that Michael writes about family sacrifice and social mobility with extraordinary insight? That his understanding of these issues comes from lived experience, from watching and absorbing lessons about dignity and hard work that most of his classmates have never encountered? I'd say you're being kind to make me feel better. I'd say you raised a son who understands the world in ways that will make him an exceptional sociologist, if he can learn to honor his background instead of hiding from it." Professor Hayes paused, considering her next words carefully. "I think it's time Michael and I had a very direct conversation about the relationship between academic achievement and personal integrity." After they hung up, Professor Hayes sat in her office, surrounded by the books and papers that represented her life's work, studying social inequality and family dynamics. Tomorrow, she would need to have one of the most difficult conversations of her teaching career. Not about theory or research methodology, but about the human cost of denying the people who make our success possible. Outside her window, the campus was quiet except for the distant sound of students enjoying their final weeks before graduation. Somewhere among them was Michael Johnson, brilliant and insightful, and completely lost about what really mattered. And somewhere else was Linda Johnson, the woman whose sacrifice had made it all possible, sitting alone in a small apartment, wondering if love was enough to bridge the distance her son had created between them. Professor Hayes had built her career on the belief that education should liberate rather than isolate, that knowledge should connect us to our communities rather than separate us from them. Tomorrow, she would find out if one of her brightest students was capable of learning the most important lesson of all. Professor Hayes arrived at her office early Monday morning, her mind already focused on the conversation she needed to have with Michael Johnson. She'd spent the weekend thinking about Linda's quiet devastation, about the brilliant young man who'd somehow convinced himself that denying his mother was a form of protection rather than betrayal. When Michael appeared for their scheduled meeting, Professor Hayes noticed immediately that he looked different, hollow-eyed, as if he hadn't slept properly in days. His usual careful composure seemed fragile, ready to crack under the slightest pressure. "Michael, please sit down." Her voice carried an authority that made him straighten in his chair. "We need to talk. If this is about my thesis, I know it's behind schedule, but this isn't about your thesis." Professor Hayes leaned forward, her expression serious. "This is about your mother." Michael's face drained of color. "I don't understand. I know Linda Johnson. I've known her for 15 years. She's one of the finest people I've ever met. Intelligent, dignified, hardworking. And she's heartbroken because her son told her she wasn't good enough to attend his graduation." The words hit Michael like physical blows. He gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. "How do you... She's not what, Michael? Not good enough? Not worthy of celebrating the achievement she made possible?" Professor Hayes' voice remained calm, but her eyes blazed with controlled anger. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at your mother. I see a woman who works 3 jobs to support her son's education. I see someone who takes pride in her work, no matter how invisible it might be to others. I see dignity that doesn't depend on titles or degrees." Michael's throat constricted. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. I grew up in a factory town, remember? I know what it's like to be caught between worlds, to feel like you don't belong in either place." Professor Hayes stood and walked to her filing cabinet, pulling out a folder. "But I also know what happens when we deny the people who shaped us." She opened the folder and spread out papers across her desk, Michael's essays from the semester, each one marked with excellent grades and detailed comments. "Look at these, Michael. Really look at them." She pointed to specific passages. "This analysis of working-class dignity, this insight into family sacrifice, this understanding of how economic pressure shapes family dynamics. Where do you think this wisdom comes from?" Michael stared at his own words, seeing them as if for the first time. His essay on social mobility discussed the psychological toll on families when children's success created distance from their origins. His paper on economic inequality explored how shame could poison relationships between parents and children across class lines. "You've been writing about your own experience all semester," Professor Hayes continued. "Your mother's experience. The very background you're ashamed of is what makes your academic work extraordinary. But she would be out of place? According to whom?" Professor Hayes's voice sharpened. "According to students like Marcus Thompson, who've never had to work for anything in their lives? According to a system that values inherited wealth over earned dignity?" Michael felt something shifting inside him, like a wall beginning to crumble. Everyone else's families are different. Successful. Professional. "Michael, let me show you something." Professor Hayes walked to her bookshelf and pulled out a photo album. She opened it to a page showing her doctoral graduation, pointing to a picture of her parents. Her father, in an ill-fitting suit. Her mother beaming with pride. "These are my parents, factory workers who never finished high school. They were terrified to attend my graduation, convinced they'd embarrass me." She turned to another photo showing herself at a podium, giving a lecture. "This is me at a conference last year, presenting research on social mobility. That research exists because of what my parents taught me about dignity and work and sacrifice." Michael studied the photos, seeing something he'd never noticed before. The pride in Professor Hayes's face when she looked at her parents. The way she positioned herself close to them in every picture. "They didn't embarrass you?" They were the most important people in that auditorium. Everything I achieved existed because of their sacrifice. Professor Hayes closed the album. Just like everything you've achieved exists because of your mother's sacrifice. Michael felt tears threatening, a pressure building in his chest that he'd been suppressing for months. I've been horrible to her. You've been scared. There's a difference, though not much of one from your mother's perspective. Professor Hayes returned to her desk and pulled out another folder, this one containing what looked like student evaluations and correspondence. Michael, I want you to see something else. She spread out papers across her desk. These are comments from students and faculty about your mother. Look at them. Michael leaned forward, reading comments that made his throat tighten with emotion. Linda Johnson is the kindest person on campus. She always asks about my research and remembers details from our conversations. Mrs. Johnson helped me through a really difficult time when I was working late on my dissertation. She treats everyone with respect and dignity. Your mother is beloved by this university community, Professor Hayes said quietly. Students and faculty alike speak of her with genuine affection and respect. She's not invisible, Michael. She's valued. Michael's hands shook as he read comment after comment, each one revealing a version of his mother he'd somehow lost sight of, the woman who remembered graduate students' names, who offered encouraging words during late-night study sessions, who approached her work with professionalism and pride. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You start by telling her the truth, that you were scared and wrong, and that you need her at graduation because she's the reason you're graduating at all. Michael looked up at Professor Hayes, seeing in her face the same combination of strength and compassion he'd always seen in Linda, but had somehow forgotten to value. What if she won't forgive me? She will. That's what mothers do. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting, Michael. You've hurt her deeply. Healing that hurt will take time and consistent demonstration that you've learned from this mistake. Michael nodded, feeling simultaneously hopeful and terrified. What about my classmates? What about people like Marcus? What about them? Professor Hayes's voice was gentle but firm. Michael, you can't build a life on other people's approval. You can't create authentic relationships based on lies about who you are. The people worth knowing will respect your background, not judge you for it. Michael thought about Jennifer's reaction, her disappointment not in his family's circumstances, but in his denial of them. He thought about the friends he'd made who knew nothing real about him, relationships built on carefully curated versions of himself. I need to call her, he said. Yes, you do. But first, you need to understand something. Professor Hayes leaned back in her chair. Your mother's love isn't conditional on your success or your social status. It never has been. The question is whether your love for her is conditional on your own pride. Michael felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. Linda had never asked him to be ashamed of her, never demanded that he hide their relationship. He'd created that distance himself, out of fear and insecurity, and a misguided belief that love required perfection. I'm going to call her now, he said, standing up. Michael. Professor Hayes's voice stopped him at the door. Remember that she's been planning for this graduation for 4 years. She bought a dress. She made hotel reservations. This wasn't just about attending a ceremony. It was about celebrating what you accomplished together. As Michael left the office, he carried with him the weight of understanding what he'd taken from Linda, and the hope that it might not be too late to give it back. The morning of graduation dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect May weather that made Eastwick College's campus look like a postcard. Linda Johnson stood before the mirror in her hotel room, the same reservation she'd almost canceled 3 times, adjusting the navy blue dress she'd bought months ago with such different expectations. The dress still fit perfectly, but the woman wearing it felt fundamentally changed from the one who'd purchased it. The past 2 weeks had been a whirlwind of difficult conversations, tentative reconciliations, and the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust between a mother and son who'd almost lost each other to shame and fear. Michael's phone call had come. At 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, his voice broken and raw with tears she could hear even across the phone line. Mom, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. About everything. I need you at graduation. I need you there because none of this means anything without you. The conversation that followed had been one of the most difficult of Linda's life. Not because Michael hadn't been sincere in his apology, but because she'd had to find her way back to believing she deserved to be there. His rejection had carved something out of her, left her questioning not just her place at his graduation, but her worth as a mother, as a person, as someone whose love and sacrifice mattered. I don't know if I can do it, she'd admitted to Susie during one of their morning shifts. Sit in that auditorium with all those families, pretending everything's fine. Honey, you're not pretending anything, Susie had replied firmly. You're claiming what's rightfully yours. That boy is graduating because of you, your sacrifice, your work, your love. You belong in that audience more than anyone else. Now, looking at herself in the hotel mirror, Linda tried to summon the confidence Susie insisted she possessed. The dress was appropriate, modest but elegant. Her hair, styled at a small salon the previous afternoon, looked neat and professional. She'd even bought new shoes, low heels that were comfortable but still formal enough for the occasion. A knock at her door interrupted her reflection. When she opened it, she found Michael standing in the hallway, wearing his graduation cap and gown, his face nervous but determined. You look beautiful, Mom. His voice carried a weight of emotion that made Linda's eyes fill with tears. She quickly blinked away. You look very handsome, very scholarly. She reached up to adjust his collar, a gesture so familiar and maternal that it seemed to release some of the tension they'd both been carrying. Mom, I want you to meet someone before we go to the ceremony. Michael's voice was carefully controlled, but Linda could hear the anxiety underneath. Jennifer's waiting, downstairs with her parents. They've been wanting to meet you. Linda's stomach clenched. This was the test she'd been dreading, meeting the girlfriend whose family represented everything Michael had thought he wanted, everything he'd believed Linda couldn't measure up to. Are you sure? She asked quietly. I'm sure. I should have. He introduced you months ago. I should have been proud to introduce you. Michael's voice carried conviction now, a strength that reminded Linda of the boy who'd once defended her work ethic to his high school classmates. They're going to love you, Mom, because I love you, and because you're exactly the kind of person worth loving. In the hotel lobby, Linda met Jennifer Chen and her parents, successful, well-dressed people who greeted her with genuine warmth that seemed unrelated to her job title or economic status. Jennifer embraced Linda like they were already family, thanking her for raising such an incredible son, with a sincerity that made Linda's remaining defenses crumble. Michael writes about you constantly, Jennifer's mother said, her accent carrying traces of her immigrant journey. Your strength, your wisdom, your sacrifices for his education. We've been so eager to meet the woman who raised such a thoughtful young man. Linda felt something shift inside her chest. Not just relief, but recognition. These people, successful as they were, understood sacrifice. They understood the immigrant story, the working class story, the parental story of giving everything for your children's future. The graduation ceremony took place on the main quad, beneath ancient oak trees that had witnessed decades of similar celebrations. Linda found herself seated between Jennifer's parents and Professor Hayes, who had specifically requested to sit with Michael's family. The professor's presence felt like a blessing, a bridge between Linda's world and this academic celebration. As the ceremony began, Linda watched hundreds of graduates file past in their caps and gowns, each one representing years of study, sacrifice, and family investment. When Michael's name was called, Linda stood with every other proud parent in the audience, applauding as her son crossed the stage to receive his diploma. But it was what happened after the ceremony that would stay with Linda forever. Michael found her in the crowd of families and graduates, his diploma in hand, his face radiant with genuine joy. But instead of posing for the obligatory photos, he took her hand and led her to a group of his classmates who were celebrating nearby. Everyone, I want you to meet my mom, Linda Johnson. His voice carried across the group with clear pride. She's the reason I'm here. She's worked 3 jobs to pay for my education, and everything I've achieved is because of her sacrifice and love. The introduction was simple, direct, and completely honest. Linda watched the faces of Michael's classmates, including Marcus Thompson, who looked somewhat taken aback, and saw not judgment or dismissal, but respect and admiration. "Mrs. Johnson, Michael talks about you all the time in our sociology classes," one young woman said. "His insights about family and work come from watching you, and they've taught us all so much." Another classmate added, "My parents are going to want to meet you. They both worked their way up from nothing too, and they always say the best people come from families who understand the value of hard work." As the afternoon progressed, Linda found herself surrounded by young people who seemed genuinely interested in her stories, her perspectives, her experiences. The invisibility she'd expected never materialized. Instead, she was embraced as part of the extended family of people who had contributed to Michael's success. Professor Hayes found her during the reception, carrying 2 cups of punch and wearing a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling beside Linda on a bench overlooking the quad. "Different," Linda admitted. "Like maybe I was wrong about not belonging here." "You were never the problem, Linda. The problem was a system that makes people like you feel invisible when you're actually essential." Professor Hayes gestured toward the celebration around them. "Look at this. Look at your son introducing you to everyone with pride. Look at how these young people respond to your story. You belong here because you made this possible." As the sun began to set over the campus, Linda stood with Michael for their official graduation photo. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling with the kind of genuine joy that comes from shared achievement and restored trust. "I'm proud of you," Linda said quietly. "I'm proud of us," Michael replied. "Of what we did together. Of what you taught me about real dignity and worth." Linda looked around at the scene. Families celebrating, graduates planning their futures, the campus alive with hope and possibility. She thought about the woman who'd bought this dress months ago, full of anticipation and doubt. That woman had been right about one thing. This day would change everything, just not in the way she'd feared. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.